Welcome back to Faith Formation at Home. This week it is the fourth Sunday of Easter, which is also known as Good Shepherd Sunday because of this gospel that we read today. It's a very famous gospel passage where Jesus says he is the good shepherd, and he goes on to say he'll lay down his life for his sheep. He's not like one of these poser shepherds who, as soon as a wolf shows up, runs away and leaves the sheep to fend for themselves against a wolf, right? He will die in combat with the wolf to protect his sheep. Right, and then he alludes at the end of it to, he mentions that he lays down his life, but he can take it up again, which is exactly what we celebrate in this Easter season. Now, chances are you don't have sheep, and neither do I, so we're not as familiar with shepherding practices and things like that. But this image of a shepherd, of a good shepherd that Jesus is evoking, is one that his original audience would have understood quite a bit, because they would have seen shepherds. Shepherds were these, like, frankly, crazy people who lived out in the field with their sheep and had personal relationships with their sheep. Right? They didn't really hang out with anybody else other than shepherds. But a shepherd knows, a good shepherd knows it's his sheep, his or her sheep. They know which ones are weaker and need a little bit of help. They know when a sheep has trouble crossing a stream, and they'll pick them up and move them. They know which sheep have a tendency to run off, and so they'll use that big shepherd's crook to kind of bring them back to safety. Right? So Jesus is evoking this image of he is a good shepherd. Right? I would propose to you that the way that you think about God colors the way that you relate to him. What I mean by that is this: if you think about God as purely a lawgiver, his whole purpose is to keep you in line and make sure you don't have too much fun in the wrong ways and all that sort of stuff, you'll approach God, you'll keep him at arm's distance, right, with some fear and trembling. And there's something good and true about that. But if that's your only image of God, you're going to kind of keep God at bay. If your image of Jesus is this like blonde-haired guy walking down the beach with a Miss America beauty pageant sash on, like we see in so many religious movies, you're going to think, yeah, Jesus he's nice for little kids, but he's kind of irrelevant as you get older. But this image that Jesus gives us today of a good shepherd, someone who knows you personally, knows your weaknesses, and doesn't yell at you for them, but helps you through those things, and loves you so much that he's willing to die and then rise again to protect you, that's an image of God. That's the image of God that Jesus himself gives us that's worth following. So our Bible story from the Jesus Storybook Bible for our little ones is A New Way to See, where we're going to meet this guy named Saul. We actually saw him at the end of last week's story, right? He was the one standing by who didn't like the apostles talking about Jesus. And now we're going to see that Saul doesn't like that so much that he's going to go persecute the church, try to arrest people and put them in jail. But something crazy happens to him on his way to Damascus. Jesus appears to him in this blinding light and literally blinds him, knocks him off his horse, and just totally changes the course of the rest of Saul's life. In fact, he even changes his name from Saul to Paul, right? Saint Paul, we know him as. He writes about half of the New Testament. He goes on to do some crazy awesome things that you can read about in the book of Acts, right? But it's an interesting story because Saul knew God really, really well, but he didn't know everything about God. So it's an interesting question for all of us, even our little ones. You've got a lot of great ideas about God, about who Jesus is from stories, from Bible stories, and from going to Mass, and from praying, and from talking to your parents about God and things like that. But sometimes we don't fully get all of God. It's a lifelong journey getting to know more and more and more about Jesus. And sometimes we'll discover things about Jesus that we didn't quite realize before, and it'll kind of change our minds a little bit on some things. So St. Paul's a nice example to us to keep learning, keep growing, keep getting to know Jesus more and more. Our final catechism questions for our older kids from the very end of this prayer section. So remember, we started off at the beginning of this book in the orange section with how can we even know that there is a God? Right? And then we got into the yellow section, the creed. If there is a God, now we can establish there's a God, and we say that we believe in him. What does it mean to believe in him? What do we believe? So we march through the articles of the creed. So we know there's a God and we believe in him. How do we celebrate that? How do we live that liturgically as a community? That's the orange section, the sacraments. Right? These 7 sensate encounters with this God that we believe in. So if we know that there's a God, we believe in this God, and we celebrate this liturgically, how do we live our lives outside of the liturgy? That's the blue section, right? Morality, the 10 Commandments. How should we live in the world? And if we know that there's a God, we believe in this God, we live it liturgically, we live it morally in our lives, how do we have a relationship with this God? That's the green section, that's prayer. And now we're in the final section of this prayer section, where it's really some catch-all questions. They don't all kind of relate together except that they're all about prayer. Right, one talks about the Psalms. Psalms is one of the longest books in the Bible. It's right in the middle, roughly the middle of the Bible. It's an Old Testament book. There's 150 of these things, and they're songs that were around in ancient Israel. King David wrote a bunch of them, and a bunch of other folks wrote some of them. The early church has prayed them and sung them. We still sing them today. The technical second reading at Mass is a song. It's the responsorial psalm right after the first reading and before what we actually call the second reading. But it's from the Bible. It's from the book of Psalms. And they're these awesome emotion-filled prayers set to music to God. So it's worth reading some of the Psalms, and you'll hear anger and frustration and joy and excitement and every human emotion you can imagine are in these Psalms. So they're really cool things to check out. My favorite question in here is question 157. How do you bless someone or something? We've probably all seen priests and deacons bless things, right? Especially at the end of Mass when they make the sign of the cross over the whole congregation, right? What I think is cool about this is this. Parents, you have the spiritual authority to bless your children. You are the priests of your household, and you, by the office of being a parent, you have the authority to bless your kids. It can be as simple as tracing a sign of the cross on their head and saying, "May God bless you," or it can be a little bit more elaborate. I try to bless my kids every night at bedtime. Most often it's a simple blessing, "May God bless you," or sometimes it's a longer formulaic blessing from the Bible. "May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May he look upon you kindly and give you peace." It's from the book of Numbers. But sometimes I'll pray blessings over them spontaneously and try to pray that God will lead them to know him and lead them to understand their purpose in life and to grow in wisdom and stature, and bless them in some issue that they're working on now. You know, bless you to understand math better because it's frustrating you, or bless you to get along with your friends better, or whatever. My kids, especially those last blessings, my kids love them because they love hearing that affirmation from me as a dad and calling down the blessing of God upon them. So parents, bless your kids. Kids, bless your rooms. You've got holy water at home, hopefully. Sprinkle that water around your room. You've got the authority to bless your own space as well. All right, so that's blessings. Then we get into the Glory Be prayer. It's a short prayer of praise to God. And then the last question, why do we end all of our prayers with amen? Amen is this emphatic, yes, this is true, I believe. And it's the way that we end all of our prayers. And so it's an appropriate way to end our faith formation year. Amen.